They called him a savage, a ghost of the mountains, a man more beast than human. His name was Elias Boone, but the folks in Cedar Ridge just called him Grizzly. And he'd just done the craziest thing anyone in the territory had ever seen. He walked right into the dress shop of Clara Wade, the town's spinster, the woman they said had been hit with the ugly stick and gone back for seconds, and asked her to be his wife. The whole town was laughing. In the Silver Dollar Saloon, cowboys choked on their whiskey. At the general store, women whispered behind their hands, their eyes glinting with cruel delight. They all thought they knew the story. A desperate, homely woman and a wild mountain man who was probably so lonely he'd marry a fence post if it wore a dress. They laughed and they gossiped, and they placed their bets on how long it would last. But what none of them knew, what nobody could even imagine, was that Elias Boone hadn't chosen Clara by accident. This wasn't about loneliness. It wasn't about desperation. It was about a secret buried for 20 years, a secret worth a fortune, and a secret he was willing to kill to protect. The town thought this was a joke. They were about to find out it was a war, and Clara Wade, the woman they'd all written off, was about to become its most dangerous soldier. The gossip in Cedar Ridge was a venom that seeped into everything. It soured the milk, rusted the nails, and poisoned the wells of human kindness. And for 15 years, Clara Wade had been its favorite victim. At 32, she was an institution of loneliness. Her shop was her sanctuary and her prison, a small room filled with the bright fabrics of other women's lives. She stitched gowns for girls going to dances she'd never attend, for brides embarking on a journey she'd long given up on. They called her plain. They called her homely. But the real word was invisible. She moved through the town like a phantom, her presence only acknowledged when a seam needed mending or a button needed sewing. Years ago, there had been hope. There had been Samuel Henderson, the banker's son, with his easy smile and promises that tasted like honey. He'd courted her when her father was a successful merchant, when a dowry was still a certainty. He'd spoken of a life together, of children, of a home at the edge of town. Then the panic of '73 hit. Her father's business collapsed like a house of cards. The dowry vanished, and so did Samuel. He hadn't just left. He'd twisted the knife. He told his friends she'd become desperate, clinging, her plainness suddenly unbearable now that it wasn't gilded with gold. The words had spread, branding her with a shame that wasn't hers to carry. Within 3 months, he was married to the richest girl in the county. The betrayal had hollowed her out, leaving behind a quiet, guarded woman who learned to expect nothing. After her parents succumbed to influenza, she'd retreated into her work. Her only companions, the medical techs her mother, a gifted herbalist, had left behind. In secret, she practiced the healing arts, delivering babies in the dead of night, treating fevers the town doctor couldn't cure, never asking for payment, never taking credit. It was a secret life, a hidden well of strength no one in Cedar Ridge ever saw. Until Elias Boone. When he filled the doorway of her shop, he was larger than the legends. 6.5 feet of raw power, with shoulders that blocked the sun, and a jagged scar that cleaved his face from temple to jaw. He looked like he'd been carved from the mountain itself. He didn't stammer or shuffle his feet. He looked her right in the eye, his gaze so direct it was like a physical touch. "Miss Wade," he said, his voice a low rumble like stones shifting underground. "I'm here to make you a proposition." It wasn't a proposal, not the kind from stories. It was a contract. "I need a wife," he stated as if discussing the purchase of livestock. "But not just any woman. I need a partner, someone with skills." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "What skills?" "Mr. Boone, I think you're mistaken. I'm a seamstress." "I know what you are," he interrupted, his eyes seeming to look right through her, past the plain dress and the tired eyes, into the secret places she kept hidden. "I know you deliver babies for the poor. I know you treated the trapper Old Man Hemlock's gangrene when Doc Garrett gave him up for dead. I know you can identify every healing herb that grows on this mountain. Your mother taught you well." Clara froze. No one knew that. No one. "I have a home. It's safe. It's supplied. I can offer you protection from this town and everything in it. I can offer you respect. In return, I need your skills. Urgently." He didn't say why, The omission hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because you know what it's like to be an outsider," he said simply. "Because you're stronger than any of the pampered dolls in this town. And because you have no one who will miss you if you disappear." The final words were a chilling confirmation. This wasn't a marriage. This was an escape. Or maybe a trap. But as she looked at his scarred face, she saw a flicker of something that wasn't savagery. It was desperation. The same desperation she felt every morning when she looked in the mirror. She thought of the whispers, the pitying looks, the ghost of Samuel Henderson's smile. She thought of a life spent stitching dreams for other people. This man wasn't offering her a dream. He was offering her a chance to be something other than the town victim. "What's on your mountain, Mr. Boone?" she asked, her voice steady. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Trouble," he said, "and I think you're just the woman to help me handle it." She agreed. She said yes to the strange, terrifying contract. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "One more thing. The Hendersons, the banker, and his son. Stay away from them. They're more dangerous than they look." The warning landed like a stone in her gut. He knew about Samuel. He knew everything. She was no longer just the town spinster. She was a piece in a game she didn't understand. And she had a horrifying feeling that she was about to find out exactly what the stakes were. The news of their engagement hit Cedar Ridge like a tornado. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was a spectacle. But beneath the laughter, something else was stirring. A nervous energy, especially among the town's elite. The first delegation arrived the next morning. Mrs. Murphy, the portly general store owner, and Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, their faces masks of false concern. "Clara, dear," Mrs. Murphy began, fanning herself though the morning was cool. "We've come as friends to beg you to reconsider this, this creature. He's not a man, he's an animal. They say he eats raw meat and sleeps in a cave with wolves," added Mrs. Patterson, clutching her Bible. Clara kept her head down, snipping a thread with sharp, deliberate precision. "He has a cabin," she said quietly, "and I find his table manners acceptable. But your reputation, your delicate sensibilities." Clara finally looked up, her gray-green eyes as cold and sharp as her scissors. "The same delicate sensibilities you all whispered about for 15 years. The same reputation you helped destroy. Why do you suddenly care about it now?" The women were stunned into silence. The Clara they knew never spoke back. But the pressure was just beginning. The next day, Judge Patterson himself paid a visit, his presence filling her small shop with the scent of whiskey and self-importance. He didn't bother with pretenses. "Miss Wade," he boomed, "I'm here to warn you, as a pillar of this community. Marrying that man would be a grave mistake. He has no standing, no property of record. If something were to happen to you up there, no one would ever know." It was a thinly veiled threat. Then came the one visitor she dreaded most, Samuel Henderson. He sauntered in, handsome and smug, the years having only softened him. "Clara," he said, his voice oozing a counterfeit sympathy, "I heard the news. I had to come. I feel responsible." "Responsible?" Clara's voice was flat. "If I hadn't, well, if things had been different, you wouldn't be so desperate as to run off with that savage. I can't stand by and watch you throw your life away. It's not too late. I could help you, find you a more suitable arrangement." He was offering to make her his charity case. The spinster he'd once courted, now an object of his pity. The rage that had been simmering in her for 15 years finally boiled over. "Let me tell you what you're responsible for, Samuel," she said, her voice dangerously low. "You're responsible for teaching me that a man's promises are worthless. You're responsible for showing me that men like you see women as assets on a ledger. So thank you. Without that lesson, I might never have recognized a man of actual worth when he walked through my door." He stared, speechless. "Now get out of my shop," she hissed, "and tell your father, the banker, to stay out of my business." The moment he was gone, the shop door swung open again. It was Elias. He hadn't been there to rescue her. He was just standing there watching the street. His eyes met hers. "They're scared," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Clara replied, her heart still pounding. "But why? Why do they care so much?" Elias stepped inside, his presence a comforting shield. He picked up a bolt of silk, his rough, scarred hands surprisingly gentle against the fine fabric. "Because they know who I am," he said softly, "and they know what's on my land. Or rather, what's under it." He finally looked at her. "The reason your father's business failed, Clara, it wasn't just the panic. It was a series of bad loans, all called in at once by one man, the town banker, Samuel Henderson's father." The air left Clara's lungs. "They didn't just abandon you," Elias continued, his voice like granite. "They destroyed you. They bought your father's land for pennies on the dollar after he died. All of it. The timber rights, the mineral rights, everything." He paused, letting the devastating truth sink in. "Except for one parcel, a piece of land deep in the mountains your mother inherited. The one my cabin is on. Old man Henderson has been trying to get his hands on it for 20 years. He thinks it's worthless, but he wants to complete the set." "But it's not worthless, is it?" Clara whispered. Elias's eyes glinted with a dangerous light. "There's a silver vein running through that mountain, Clara, richer than anything they've seen in Colorado. And Henderson knows it. He just found out. That's why he and his friends are so desperate to stop this wedding." He laid the silk back down. "By marrying you, I legally become the steward of your property. That land, your mother's land, becomes protected by my rifle. They can't swindle you out of it if you're my wife." It all clicked into place. The warnings, the threats, the sudden, suffocating concern. It was never about her. It was about greed. "So this marriage, it's about the silver," she said, a new kind of cold seeping into her. "The silver is the battlefield," Elias corrected her gently. "But the war is for your birthright. They took everything from your family. I'm offering you a chance to take it back." This was so much bigger than she'd imagined. It was a heist, a reclamation, a rebellion of two outsiders against the corrupt heart of the town. She was no longer a bride-to-be. She was an heiress about to go to war for her inheritance. And her fiancé wasn't just a mountain man. He was her general. The wedding day arrived like a storm front, the air thick with tension. The entire town crammed into the church, not to celebrate, but to witness a disaster. They whispered and stared, their faces a gallery of morbid curiosity. They were expecting a circus. Clara walked down the aisle alone, her head held high. She wore a simple dress of dark blue wool, practical and severe. It was a statement. She was not a blushing bride. She was a woman reporting for duty. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, judging, mocking. She saw Samuel Henderson in the front pew, his wife dripping with jewels beside him. She saw the banker, the judge, all the men who had orchestrated her family's ruin, all watching with tight, angry smiles. But when she looked at the altar, the whispers in the church died in a collective gasp. The man waiting for her was not Grizzly Boone. Gone were the buckskins, the wild hair, the beard of a mountain hermit. In his place stood a stranger. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silver vest. His hair was trimmed, his beard neatly shaped. He looked less like a grizzly and more like a gentleman from back east, a wealthy industrialist, a scholar. The jagged scar on his face was still there, but now, against the backdrop of refined clothing, it didn't look savage. It looked dangerous. The mark of a man who had seen battles and won them. He wasn't just a mountain man who cleaned up well. This was who he really was. Grizzly was the costume. This was the man. His eyes found hers, and in them, she saw a flicker of grim satisfaction. "Let them see," the look said. "Let them wonder." The ceremony was a blur. Judge Patterson, forced to officiate, rushed through the vows, his voice sweating with resentment. When it came time for the rings, Elias produced a simple gold band. As he slipped it onto her finger, Clara felt the warmth of the metal, a solid, undeniable reality. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the judge mumbled, his face the color of sour milk. "You may kiss the bride." This was the moment the town was waiting for. The punchline, the beast claiming his prize. Elias turned to her. He didn't grab her. He didn't crush her in a rough embrace. He gently cupped her face in his large scarred hands, his touch surprisingly tender. He looked into her eyes, a silent promise passing between them. Then he leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft, brief kiss. A kiss of respect, of partnership. It was a seal on their contract. When he pulled away, he turned to face the stunned congregation. He and Clara stood side by side, a united front. The town had come for a freak show. They were leaving with a mystery. Outside, a wagon was waiting, packed not just with her meager belongings, but with crates of supplies. Rifles, ammunition, tools, sacks of flour and beans. It wasn't a honeymoon carriage. It was a war wagon. As Elias helped her onto the seat, Amy Chen, the laundryman's daughter, darted out from the crowd. She pressed a small, lumpy package into Clara's hand. "Mama said to give you this." She said, "True friends see with the heart." It was the first genuine act of kindness Clara had received all day. As they drove out of town, the silent, staring faces of Cedar Ridge receding behind them, Clara felt a strange sense of liberation. She had left her cage. "The suit was a surprise," she said, breaking the silence. "A man should look respectable on his wedding day," Elias replied, his eyes on the road ahead. "And it's important to remind your enemies that you are not what they think you are." He tugged at the stiff collar. "Though I'll be glad to be shed of it." The wagon climbed higher into the mountains, leaving the settled world behind. The air grew crisp and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. This was his territory now, their territory. "Are you ready?" he asked, not looking at her. Clara thought of the town's scorn, of the Hendersons' greed, of the stolen legacy of her family. She thought of the silver hidden in the mountain, a secret waiting to be unearthed. "I've been ready for 15 years, she said. The journey ended in a hidden valley, nestled so deep in the mountains it felt like a secret world. And the cabin, it wasn't a cabin. It was a fortress. Built from thick, interlocking logs with a stone foundation and a slate roof, it was a small, defensible keep. The windows were narrow with heavy wooden shutters that could be barred from the inside. The porch was raised, offering a clear field of fire in every direction. A sturdy barn and a well-stocked root cellar stood nearby. This wasn't the home of a hermit. It was the stronghold of a man expecting a siege. Inside, the surprises continued. The main room was dominated by a massive stone fireplace, but one wall was covered, floor to ceiling, with books. Philosophy, engineering, geology, history, and next to the fireplace, a heavy iron-doored safe was bolted to the floor. "You have 2 rooms," Elias said, his voice echoing in the quiet space. "The main bedroom and a smaller study. You may take your pick. We are partners in this, not traditional husband and wife. Your privacy will be respected." He was holding to the terms of their contract. Business first. That night they ate a silent meal of venison stew. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Who was this man, really? The savage they called Grizzly, or the scholar who read Plato? After dinner, he finally broke the silence. "Tomorrow your training begins." "Training?" "Henderson won't give up on that silver easily," Elias said, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. "He'll send men, not lawmen, thugs. You need to know how to defend this place, how to shoot, how to survive if I'm not here." He looked up from the rifle, his eyes dark and serious. "I told you I needed your skills as a healer. That was the truth. The men who will come, they will be armed. There will be injuries, on both sides. You need to be prepared for that." The reality of her situation hit Clara with the force of a physical blow. She had traded the slow death of mockery for the potential of a very real, violent one. She chose the small study for her room. It was sparse, but it had a desk and a small cot. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the mountain, she felt a tremor of fear. But then she thought of the Hendersons, fat and content in their fine houses, built on the ruins of her family. The fear curdled into something harder, something colder. Resolve. The next morning, Elias led her to a clearing behind the cabin. He handed her a rifle. It was heavy, the wood smooth and cool in her hands. "I will teach you to make every shot count," he said. "Out here, you don't get second chances." He was a patient, demanding teacher. He taught her how to stand, how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger without flinching. For days she practiced, her shoulder aching, her ears ringing. At first, she could barely hit the tree the target was nailed to, but slowly her aim improved. He also taught her the ways of the mountain, how to track, how to set snares, which plants were edible and which were poison. He showed her the secret paths, the hidden springs, the escape route that led through an old mining tunnel. And she, in turn, began to organize his home. She set up her apothecary, arranging her mother's herbs and medical tools. She discovered he had a stockpile of medical supplies that would rival Doc Garrett's. He had been planning for this war for a long time. One evening, as she was cataloging his supplies, she found a locked medical chest. Elias was out checking the perimeter. Curiosity got the better of her. She picked the simple lock with a hairpin. Inside, beneath bandages and bottles of carbolic acid, was a leather-bound journal. It wasn't his. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. She opened it to the first page. The entry was dated 20 years ago. "My dearest Clara," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I have failed to protect you from the greed of men. But know this, my child. What was stolen can be recovered. The mountain holds our future. The deed to the silver claim is hidden." It was her mother's journal. Her mother knew about the silver. She had known all along. Clara kept reading, her hands trembling. Her mother wrote of the Hendersons, of their threats, of their relentless pressure to sell the land. She wrote of a young man, a surveyor, who had helped her map the claim. A man who promised to watch over it. A man who disappeared after a suspicious hunting accident that had left him scarred for life. A man named Elias Boone. It all crashed down on her. Elias hadn't just stumbled upon her. He hadn't just been an admirer from afar. He had been guarding her legacy for 20 years. Their marriage wasn't a contract. It was the fulfillment of a 2-decade-old promise. When Elias returned, she was waiting for him in the main room, the open journal on the table between them. He saw it and stopped. The guarded stoic mask he always wore fell away, revealing a flash of pain and regret. "You knew my mother," Clara said. It was a statement, not a question. "Yes," he said quietly. "She was a good woman, a brave woman. She saved my life after Henderson's men ambushed me. I made her a promise that I would watch over the land and over you." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because Henderson would have used you against me," he said, his voice raw with an old anger. "As long as you were the poor, overlooked spinster, you were safe. Insulted, but safe. If he ever knew you were the key to that silver, he would have removed you. Marrying you was the only way to bring you under my protection without revealing the whole game." He had spent 20 years in self-imposed exile, living as a hermit, building a reputation as a savage, all to be the guardian of her secret. The loneliness, the isolation, it was all part of his shield. "So the proposal, my skills—" "I do need your skills," he insisted, "but I didn't choose you for them. I chose you because it was my duty, my promise." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like a cage. He hadn't married her because he saw her strength or her kindness or anything about her. He had married her out of obligation. She was not his partner. She was his ward. A precious object he had to protect to fulfill a promise to a dead woman. The realization was more painful than any of the town's mockery. The first attack came a week later, just after dawn. They weren't thugs. They were professionals. 3 riders, silent and efficient, who moved with the confidence of men who killed for a living. Elias had been expecting them. The perimeter was rigged with tripwires tied to bells. The soft chime from the forest was their only warning. "Inside, now," Elias ordered, his voice calm and deadly. "Bar the shutters. Get the rifles." Clara's training kicked in. Her fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but her hands were steady. She moved through the cabin, securing it, laying out ammunition and medical supplies. The first shots splintered the log wall next to her head. Elias was a force of nature. He moved from window to window, never firing twice from the same spot, his shots precise and controlled. He wasn't trying to kill them. He was trying to drive them off. One of the men made a run for the barn. "The south window, Clara! Pin him down!" Elias yelled. Clara rested her rifle on the sill, her heart pounding. She found the running man in her sights, just as Elias had taught her. She breathed out and squeezed the trigger. The shot kicked dirt up at the man's feet. He stumbled, diving for cover behind a water trough. He was pinned. The firefight lasted for nearly an hour. It ended when Elias managed to shoot the horse out from under the leader. The remaining two men grabbed their wounded companion and retreated back into the woods. The silence that followed was deafening. One of the men they'd driven off had left a trail of blood. The wound in his shoulder looked bad. "He'll be back," Elias said, reloading his rifle. "And he'll bring more men next time. Henderson won't stop." The battle had changed something between them. Clara had not panicked. She had stood her ground. She had fought. She had seen the cold, deadly efficiency of her husband, and she hadn't flinched. That night, a blizzard rolled in, trapping them in the cabin. The wind howled, rattling the shutters. But inside it was quiet. "You did well today," Elias said, looking at her across the fireplace. It was the first time he had looked at her not as a duty, but as an equal. "You trained me well," she replied. "The training can only do so much," he said. "The rest, that was you. Your mother had that same steel in her." There it was again. Her mother. Always her mother. "I am not my mother, Elias," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "I appreciate the promise you made her. I appreciate you protecting me. But I am not some parcel of land to be guarded. This is my fight, too. My inheritance. My name the Hendersons destroyed." He looked at her, truly looked at her, for what felt like the first time. He saw the fire in her eyes, the set of her jaw. He saw a woman who had been underestimated her entire life, who was finally claiming her own power. "You're right," he said slowly. "You're not your mother. You're formidable." The word hung in the air. Not beautiful, not kind. Formidable. Coming from him, it was the highest compliment. The blizzard raged for 3 days. Trapped in the cabin, the tension between them shifted from the professional to the personal. They talked. Really talked. She told him about Samuel, about the years of loneliness. He told her about the war, about the promise to her mother, about the crushing weight of his 20-year vigil. They were two lonely people, bound by a promise to a ghost. On the third night, the firewood was running low. Elias had to venture out to the woodshed. He was only gone a few minutes, but when he came back, he was covered in snow, his breathing ragged. He collapsed just inside the door. Clara rushed to his side. An arrow was protruding from his thigh. "Ambush," he gasped. "They used the storm for cover." It was a poison arrow, not lethal, but debilitating. A cruel, slow-acting neurotoxin from a plant her mother had warned about in her journal. It would paralyze him within the hour. They were still out there, waiting. She dragged him to the fireplace, her mind racing. She barred the door, then went to work. She knew the antidote, a rare moss that grew only on the north side of black birch trees. There were some in a grove a quarter-mile from the cabin. Going out there was suicide, but staying was a death sentence. "Clara, don't," Elias mumbled, his speech already slurring. "You made a promise to my mother to protect me," she said, strapping a pistol to her waist and grabbing a lantern. "Now I'm making a promise to you. I will not let you die." She slipped out the back entrance into the raging heart of the blizzard. The wind was a physical wall, the snow a blinding curtain. She couldn't see more than 3 feet in front of her. The men out there would have a fire. They would be watching the cabin. She had to be a ghost. She crept through the woods, the rifle feeling impossibly heavy. She could hear them, their low voices muffled by the storm. They were close, too close. She found the grove of birches. Her fingers were numb as she scraped the precious moss from the bark. She had what she needed. Now she just had to get back. On the way she stumbled. Her lantern fell, its light extinguishing in the snow. And in that moment of darkness, she heard a twig snap right behind her. She spun around, raising the pistol, and fired into the blackness. A man grunted and fell. She didn't wait to see if he was dead. She ran. She ran blindly through the storm, branches whipping her face, her lungs burning. She burst back into the cabin, slamming and barring the door behind her. Elias was barely conscious. She prepared the antidote, her hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. She forced the poultice into his mouth, praying it wasn't too late. For hours she sat by his side, watching, waiting. The poison had to run its course. Just before dawn, his fever broke. His breathing evened out. He opened his eyes. They were clear. "You came back," he whispered. "I keep my promises," she replied, her voice choked with exhaustion and relief. He reached up and touched the new scratch on her cheek, his fingers gentle. "I am no longer your guardian, Clara Boone," he said, his voice filled with a new kind of awe. "You are no one's ward." He looked at her, and for the first time, she didn't see the ghost of her mother in his eyes. He was seeing her, Clara, the woman who had ridden into a blizzard and faced down assassins to save his life. The promise to her mother had been fulfilled. Now, a new promise was being forged between them. One not of duty, but of something far more dangerous and far more powerful. Trust. As Elias recovered, the dynamic in the fortress cabin shifted. The line between guardian and ward, between partners in a contract, dissolved. They were now two soldiers in the same trench, united by a shared enemy and a growing, unspoken respect. Clara's actions during the blizzard had changed everything. Elias no longer saw her as a duty to be fulfilled. He saw her as an ally, a formidable, brilliant ally. And Clara, having faced death and won, was no longer the timid spinster. The mountain had stripped away her layers of doubt and fear, revealing the core of steel she never knew she possessed. They began to plan their counterattack. "Henderson thinks he's fighting one man," Elias said one evening, as they studied a map of the region. "He needs to learn he's fighting two." Clara, looking at her mother's journal, found the key. Her mother had not just mapped the silver vein. She had documented every shady land deal, every coerced sale, every act of corruption Henderson Sr. had committed over 30 years. She had built a case against him, piece by piece. "She was going to expose him," Clara whispered, her eyes wide. "That's why they had to silence her. The influenza outbreak, was it just a coincidence?" "There are no coincidences with men like Henderson," Elias said grimly. They had the proof. They had the motive. Now they needed a way to use it. The annual Founders' Day celebration in Cedar Ridge was in 2 weeks. The whole territory would be there. It was the perfect stage. Their plan was audacious, risky. It could get them both killed. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Clara practiced with the rifle until she could hit a silver dollar at 50 yards. Elias used his knowledge of geology to create a detailed, undeniable map of the silver vein, proving it lay entirely on Clara's inherited land. The day before the celebration, they rode into town, not as a mountain man and his wife, but as a force to be reckoned with. Elias wore his tailored suit. Clara wore a deep green riding habit she had stitched herself, a dress that was both elegant and practical. It made her gray-green eyes shine like polished jade. They didn't hide. They rode straight down Main Street. The town stared, mouths agape. This was not the ugly spinster and the mountain savage. This was a power couple. They radiated a confidence that was almost terrifying. They went straight to the telegraph office. Elias sent a long, detailed message to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne, outlining Henderson's crimes and promising to provide concrete proof the next day. He knew Henderson had the telegraph operator in his pocket. The message was not for the marshal. It was for Henderson. It was a declaration of war. That night, they took a room at the hotel. They knew Henderson's men would come for them. They came just after midnight. This time, Elias and Clara were not barricaded in a fortress. They were in a flimsy hotel room. But they were ready. When the door splintered open, the attackers found the room empty. Elias, hiding in the armoire, took out the first man. Clara, under the bed, shot the second in the leg. The third man turned to run. But the town's sheriff, the one honest lawman in Cedar Ridge, whom Elias had secretly tipped off, was standing in the hallway. It was over in seconds. The next day at the Founders' Day picnic, the entire town was buzzing. Henderson's thugs were in jail. The banker and his son were nowhere to be seen. Judge Patterson was giving his annual pompous speech when Elias and Clara walked up to the gazebo. "Judge," Elias said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd, "I believe the people of this town deserve to hear the truth about its founding father." He laid out the whole story, the stolen land, the fraudulent loans. He unrolled his geological map, showing the silver vein. And then Clara stepped forward. She held up her mother's journal. "This is the journal of Margaret Wade," she announced, her voice clear and strong. It contains 30 years of evidence documenting the crimes of William Henderson. It details how he cheated, stole, and likely murdered to build his fortune. A fortune built on the ruins of my family and many of yours. She began to read. She read names, dates, amounts. She read passages about threats and intimidation. A low murmur went through the crowd as people heard the names of their own fathers and grandfathers, men who had been unlucky in business, who had lost their land to the bank. The final piece of evidence was a signed confession from the telegraph operator, procured by the sheriff, admitting he'd been intercepting messages for Henderson for years, including messages that proved Henderson had deliberately withheld medicine during the influenza outbreak from families who stood in his way. The crowd erupted in fury. This wasn't just about Clara. This was about all of them. When the Hendersons finally showed up, escorted by the sheriff, the crowd turned into a mob. They were arrested on the spot, their reign of terror over. In the ensuing chaos, Elias and Clara stood together on the gazebo, the journal in her hand, the map at their feet. They hadn't just won back her land. They had liberated the entire town. Clara Wade, the invisible spinster, was now a hero. That evening, as they prepared to ride back to the mountains, people approached them, not with pity or scorn, but with respect, with gratitude. They brought gifts, a pie, a cured ham, a bottle of fine whiskey. Amy Chen and her mother came forward. "We always knew you were special, Clara," Mrs. Chen said, her eyes wet with tears. As they finally rode out of town, leaving the lights and the celebration behind, Clara felt a sense of peace she had never known. "It's over," she said. "It's just beginning," Elias replied. He reached over and took her hand. His hand was large and calloused, but his grip was gentle. "The silver will make you a wealthy woman, Clara." "It will make us wealthy," she corrected him. "Partners." He looked at her in the fading light, his face no longer guarded. "Clara," he began, his voice hesitant, "the promise I made your mother, it was about more than the land. I promised her I would find a good man to protect you, a man who would see your worth. For 20 years I looked. I never found one good enough." He paused, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "It never occurred to me that the man would be me." He stopped the wagon. "This marriage began as a contract, a duty, but it's not that anymore. Not for me." He finally looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "I see you, Clara. Not your mother, not your inheritance. You, your strength, your courage, your beautiful, formidable heart. I think I'm falling in love with you." Clara's own heart swelled, full to bursting. She had spent a lifetime feeling invisible. And this man, this wonderful, complicated man, saw her more clearly than anyone ever had. She leaned over and kissed him. Not a kiss of contract or partnership, a kiss of homecoming, a kiss that promised a future far richer than any silver vein. The town would tell the story for generations, the legend of Grizzly Boone and the ugly spinster. They would say he saved her. They would say she was lucky. But up in their mountain fortress, which was slowly becoming a home, Clara and Elias knew the truth. She had never been ugly. She had just been waiting for someone brave enough to see her beauty. And he had never been a savage. He had just been a guardian, waiting for his queen. They hadn't saved each other. They had forged each other in the fires of battle, emerging stronger together. The world had called them rejects, but in each other, they had found their home. If you enjoyed this story of justice and unlikely love, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We share tales from the wild heart of the frontier every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. And let me know in the comments. What do you think the first thing Clara and Elias did with the Henderson fortune was? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening.